There are days when the market feels like it's testing you, not with price action, but with emotion. Days when a single loss feels heavier than it should, when your breathing tightens, when your hands move faster than your mind, when the chart stops being a chart and becomes a battlefield inside your own head. Every trader knows this place. Every trader has felt that shift. The moment when logic fades and your emotions take the wheel. This is tilt. Silent, subtle, powerful. And if you don't catch it early, it can erase a good day, a good week, a good month in minutes. But tilt is not your enemy. Tilt is your signal. And today I will show you how to recognize that signal long before it spirals out of control. This is Tilt Control 2 Alarms to Save Your Day. Welcome to Mind Over Markets, where we don't just trade charts, we trade our psychology. There is a moment in every trader's life when the screen stops being just a screen. It becomes a mirror that reflects back everything you try to hide from yourself, your fear, your pride, your impatience, your need to be right, your hunger for validation, your desperation to undo what cannot be undone. And in that moment, you don't recognize you're looking at yourself. You think you're staring at the market. But the truth is, the market isn't what you're fighting. You're fighting your own impulses. You're fighting your own emotional momentum. You're fighting the psychological inertia that builds up inside you when things stop going your way. This is the state traders call tilt. Tilt is not simply being emotional. Tilt is not just frustration. Tilt is not even the sting of a loss. Tilt is when your emotional brain hijacks the controls, when your rational process collapses, and when the person clicking the button is no longer the trader, but the child inside you who cannot tolerate being wrong. The part of you that feels threatened when the world does not bend to your expectations. Tilt is what happens when your nervous system takes over the wheel. Every trader knows this place intimately. The accelerated heartbeat, the shallow breath, the twitch in the fingers, the heat behind the eyes, the tightening of the jaw, the thought, I'll get it back, I have to get it back, and suddenly you're not trading anymore. You're reacting. You're no longer responding to price. You're responding to pain. This video is about how to recognize that moment, how to catch yourself before you slip into the spiral, and how two extremely simple psychological alarms can save not only your trading day, but your dignity, your account, and the way you see yourself. Before we go into the alarms, I want to tell you a story, because every trader who has survived long enough has one story that marks the turning point. One moment where everything could have gone wrong, but where the lesson became the beginning of discipline. There was a trader, let's call him Daniel. Daniel wasn't a beginner. He was good enough to win consistently, good enough to think he had things figured out. And that was the problem. One morning, Daniel took a perfectly valid setup. He followed his system. He respected his risk. But the market did what markets do. It moved where it wanted, not where he believed it should. He took a loss. It was a small loss, nothing unusual. But inside him, something small cracked, something almost invisible. A voice barely noticeable whispered it shouldn't have happened. Not today. Not after the work I put in. Not after doing everything right. He didn't feel angry yet. He just felt wronged, entitled, as if the universe had made a mistake and it was his responsibility to correct it. So he placed another trade. Not a stupid one, not an oversized one, just another good one. And it lost too. This time, he felt the sting, the heat rising in the chest, the pressure behind the eyes, the tension in the exhale. He wasn't just losing money, he felt like he was losing competence, losing control, losing the version of himself he believed he was. So he did what millions of traders have done before him. He tried to win it back, not logically, not calmly, but emotionally. Within 40 minutes, Daniel had tripled his typical position size. He had removed a stop loss. He clicked impulsively. He stared at the screen as if the chart owed him something. He was no longer present. He was possessed by the need to restore psychological balance. And when it was all over, he wasn't down the 1% he had started with. He wasn't even down the 3% he had lost on the second trade. He was down 9%. 9% in a single morning. And the worst part wasn't the money. It was the shame. The shame of knowing that he hadn't lost because of the market. He had lost because of the emotional earthquake inside him. He closed the platform. He sat in silence, and he wondered, how does this happen? How does it happen so fast? How do I go from calm to chaos in the span of minutes? The answer is tilt. Tilt is silent until it isn't. Tilt builds quietly and visibly, and then it strikes all at once. But here's the part that most traders never learn. Tilt is predictable. It has patterns. It has early warning signs. And if you're paying attention, you can detect the earthquake long before the ground splits beneath you. There are two alarms you must learn to recognize: a behavioral alarm and an emotional alarm. You need both, because behavior without emotion can be misleading, and emotion without behavior can be subtle. But when both alarms activate, that is the moment you must stop. That is the moment you must protect your capital, your clarity, your skill, and your identity as a disciplined trader. Before we break down these alarms, you need to understand something deep. Tilt is not random. Tilt is not a weakness. Tilt is a biological response. When you experience an unexpected loss, your brain doesn't interpret it as, a normal part of trading. Your brain interprets it as a threat, not just a threat to your money, but a threat to your status, your identity, your competence, and your illusion of control. This activates your body's fight or flight system. Your pupils dilate. Your breath shortens. Your vision narrows. Your thinking becomes binary. You stop analyzing and start reacting. You become hyper-focused on the next action, even if that action is irrational. You are no longer trading the market. You are trading your stress response. And the first step in controlling tilt is accepting that tilt lives in your physiology before it shows up in your thoughts and long before it shows up in your actions. Every trader who fails thinks tilt is about the mind. Every trader who survives knows tilt begins in the body. The first alarm, the behavioral alarm, is the first external sign that your internal state is shifting. You start clicking faster. You open the order panel even when you're not fully convinced. You browse time frames like you're searching for a justification. You hesitate on a stop loss. You increase your size just a little. You trade setups you would normally ignore. You become restless, fidgety, reactive. These behaviors are not random. They are signals that your subconscious is sliding out of the driver's seat. But behavior alone is not enough to confirm tilt. Sometimes behavior is just habit. Sometimes it's just energy or excitement. So behavioral alarms are only one half of the detection system. The second half is emotional. The emotional alarm is the internal experience that warns you your decisions are no longer coming from clarity but from discomfort, anger, frustration, fear, panic, tension, impatience, the need to immediately undo the loss, the need to prove something to yourself, the need to be right. These emotions shift your internal chemistry. And once that chemistry changes, the mind follows, the decisions follow, and the account follows. Tilt isn't a switch you flip. Tilt is a slope you slide down. The alarms don't prevent the slope from existing. They prevent you from stepping onto it. But you need both alarms active to confirm that you are truly compromised. A behavior without emotion is noise. An emotion without behavior is a flare. But when behavior and emotion collide, that is tilt. And that is the moment your day can be saved if you act quickly. In the next section, we will dig into these alarms in detail. We will explore exactly how they show up, what they feel like, how to detect them in real time, and how to stop yourself before the spiral takes over. But for now, I want you to internalize this message. Tilt is not a failure. Tilt is a signal. Tilt is your mind telling you that your identity is threatened and that your emotional brain is stepping forward to protect you. The goal is not to eliminate tilt. The goal is to recognize tilt before it recognizes you. Tilt rarely announces its arrival. It never knocks on the door. It slips quietly into your system like a fog moving across the ground, barely visible until it surrounds you. And by the time most traders notice it, their decisions have already been hijacked. Their discipline has already evaporated. Their rational mind has already handed over the controls to the part of them that wants relief, not results. But here's the truth. Tilt gives you warnings, early warnings, consistent warnings, predictable warnings. Warnings that most traders ignore because they are too focused on the chart to notice the chart behind the chart, their own internal state. Tilt is detectable long before it becomes destructive. And that's where the first alarm comes in. The behavioral alarm is the visible shift in how you interact with the market. It is the disturbance in your rhythm, the interruption in your flow, the deviation from the way a calm, present trader behaves. Let's explore it deeply. A trader on the edge of tilt moves differently, speaks differently, breathes differently, acts with a kind of restless urgency that betrays the illusion of control. You may notice yourself clicking too quickly, flicking through time frames like you're searching for certainty, when deep down you know you are searching for comfort. You may see yourself changing the position size, not because the setup deserves it, but because the wound inside you demands to be soothed. You may catch yourself queuing up trades that are outside your plan. Not terrible trades, just low-quality ones. Trades you would ignore on any other day but suddenly feel good enough. Because what you really want is not profit, but emotional release. You may find that you're ignoring your rules in subtle ways, moving a stop-loss half an inch, holding on to a loser a few seconds longer, closing a winner too early because you don't trust your read, adjusting your plan mid-trade because the pain of being wrong is stronger than the discipline of being consistent. These behaviors are not random. They are symptoms. They are tremors before the quake. They are the body acting out the stress that the mind is trying to contain. A trader in tilt doesn't trust the process. He trusts the urge. He trusts the impulse. He trusts the instinct that feels like insight, but is actually fear wearing a disguise. The behavioral alarm is your first signal that your trading mind is slipping. It is your first indication that you are no longer operating from clarity, but from a growing internal chaos. And yet, just because you shift behavior does not mean tilt is confirmed. Sometimes behavior is energy. Sometimes behavior is excitement. Sometimes behavior is just the mind wanting stimulation. That's why the behavioral alarm is not enough on its own. The second alarm, the emotional alarm, is where the truth lies. The emotional alarm is the internal storm, the rising tide of discomfort, the tightening in your chest or the pressure behind your forehead that tells you something is off, even if you cannot articulate it. It starts small. It always starts small. A mild annoyance at a loss, a little irritation at missing a setup, a slight jealousy when another trader posts a win, a subtle need to prove that you still got it, a whisper of insecurity that creeps in when the market doesn't validate you. But emotions don't stay small for long. They grow. They intensify. They gather momentum just like a cascading trade going against you. Anger sharpens, fear deepens, panic accelerates, shame emerges, frustration boils, and all of a sudden the emotions that were once background noise become the primary force driving your decisions. The emotional alarm is the internal shift from being calm and objective to being reactive and threatened. When you notice your breath getting shallow, tilt has begun. When you feel your heart race, tilt has begun. When you catch yourself thinking in desperate pressured patterns, tilt has begun. But the alarm becomes undeniable when you notice the psychological pull to undo the pain. The pain of losing, the pain of being wrong, the pain of feeling inadequate, the pain of seeing your expectations crumble. And so you react, you chase, you press, you force, not because the opportunity is good, but because your internal discomfort demands resolution. This emotional alarm is your psyche revealing its vulnerability. It is the sign that your rational mind is being overshadowed by the primal part of you that cannot tolerate loss and cannot endure uncertainty. When both alarms appear together, behavioral and emotional tilt is present, not future, not potential, present. This is the moment traders ignore most. They tell themselves it's temporary. They convince themselves they're fine. They rationalize the discomfort away because admitting they've lost control feels like losing even more. But denial is the doorway to disaster. The purpose of these two alarms is not to shame you or to remind you of your faults. The purpose is to give you a psychological early detection system that saves your day, your account, and your sanity. Because tilt is not an event. Tilt is a state. It doesn't hit you in one blow. It builds, it compounds, it stacks until the weight collapses your discipline. Think back to the last time you tilted. Really think. Not the version you tell yourself, not the sanitized version. The real thing. The frustration, the desperation, the need to fix it. The need to reset your emotional state by force. That version of you didn't appear out of nowhere. He emerged from ignored signals, ignored alarms, ignored tension, ignored discomfort. And ignoring those alarms is how traders destroy months of progress in minutes. But here's the part that changes everything. When you train yourself to recognize these alarms early, you begin to build a form of self-trust that most traders never experience. Imagine recognizing the shift in your breathing before you click impulsively. Imagine catching yourself speeding up your movements before a reckless trade begins. Imagine noticing the pressure rising inside you before you double your size. These micro recognitions are the foundation of emotional mastery. And emotional mastery is the real edge in trading. Not indicators, not strategies, not timing, not entries. Emotional mastery. The ability to notice what is happening inside you before it translates into action. The ability to pause before the spiral begins. The ability to interrupt the emotional wave before it breaks on top of you. These two alarms are not theoretical ideas. They are practical. They are grounded. They are accessible. And most importantly, they are effective. And here's something traders never expect. Tilt doesn't just come from losses. Tilt also comes from wins. Big wins, fast wins, unexpected wins. The trader who wins too quickly can tilt into overconfidence, into recklessness, into pride, into euphoria. And that form of tilt is just as destructive as the tilt born from pain. Because in both cases, the emotional brain takes over. In both cases, behavior shifts. In both cases, the alarms ring. Tilt is not the emotion itself. Tilt is the loss of presence caused by the emotion. Presence is the antidote to tilt. Presence is the state of mind where you see clearly instead of reacting blindly. And presence begins with awareness. Awareness of your breath, awareness of your pace, awareness of your internal temperature, awareness of your tone of thought, awareness of your urge to act. A calm trader is aware. A tilt-prone trader is unconscious. Tilt is unconscious trading. Tilt is mindless. Tilt is mechanical. Tilt is emotional reflex. Tilt is the absence of awareness. And if you want to control tilt, you must learn to cultivate awareness in small moments long before the big moments arrive. Now that we've explored the behavioral alarm and the emotional alarm, we will go deeper. We will break down exactly how these alarms manifest in real time, exactly how to interpret them, exactly how to respond when they activate. But before we go there, there is something fundamental you must understand. Tilt control is not about suppressing emotions. It is not about forcing calm. It is not about pretending to be a machine. Tilt control is about recognizing your humanity and creating enough space between stimulus and response to choose wisely. The space is what saves you. The space is what keeps you consistent. The space is what allows you to trade well even when the world inside you is shaking. Tilt is not your enemy. Tilt is your signal. Tilt is your teacher. Tilt is the moment where your discipline is tested and where your true identity as a trader is revealed. In the next part, we will explore how to turn these alarms into rules, into habits, into reflexes that protect you automatically. We will also look at case studies, real psychological breakdowns, and the subtle behaviors that warn you long before the spiral begins. But for now, hold this truth close. A trader who recognizes tilt early is a trader who wins the long game. When both alarms activate the behavioral shift and the emotional shift, you enter a psychological crossroads. One path leads to pause, reflection, recovery. The other leads to compulsion, impulsivity, and the collapse of discipline. Most traders choose the wrong path not because they lack intelligence, but because they lack awareness. Awareness is the gatekeeper between control and chaos. And your entire trading future depends on which side of that gate you learn to stand on. Understanding these alarms is the first step. But understanding alone is not enough. Knowledge without application becomes just another thing you once knew but never used when it mattered. So this section is about application. The moment when the alarms ring and you recognize the signs, what happens next? What do you do? How do you stop the slide? There is a simple rule, but it takes courage to follow. When both alarms activate, you stop. Not later. Not after one more trade. Not after just trying to get back to break even. You stop immediately. Because tilt is exponential. Tilt doesn't deteriorate linearly. It accelerates. Like a snowball rolling downhill turning into an avalanche. One of the greatest illusions in trading is the belief that you can handle tilt, that you can contain it, that you can stay rational even as your emotions flare and your behavior becomes erratic. But tilt is undefeated against the trader who refuses to pause. Tilt thrives on momentum, the momentum of emotion, the momentum of reaction, the momentum of urgency, the momentum of your internal discomfort trying desperately to resolve itself through action. But action is exactly what feeds tilt. The more you act from an unstable mind, the more unstable you become. So the first rule of tilt control is deceptively simple. Stop when the alarms activate. But this raises a deeper question. Why is it so hard to stop? Why does stepping away feel painful? Why does pausing feel like failure? The answer lies in the psychology of identity. When you take a loss, your mind interprets it as a threat to your competence, a threat to your ego, a threat to the version of yourself you want to believe you are. Stopping feels like surrender. Stopping feels like admitting defeat. Stopping feels like accepting the pain. So most traders continue not because they truly believe the next trade is good, but because they cannot tolerate the emotional weight of stopping without resolution. They want closure. They want redemption. They want to feel whole again. This is why stopping feels unnatural, because it goes against the emotional logic of the mind. To stop when you're triggered is to sit in the discomfort of being human, to sit in the vulnerability of imperfection, to sit in the realization that you are not in control. Stopping is uncomfortable precisely because it is the right thing to do. Tilt is not about the market. Tilt is about your relationship with yourself. The trader who cannot stop is the trader who cannot sit with unresolved emotion. And that is the real work. When both alarms go off, the rule is to stop. But the deeper rule is to learn to tolerate discomfort without needing to fix it immediately. This is the skill that separates the trader who grows from the trader who blows up. Now let's go deeper into how these alarms manifest in real time. Imagine you lose a trade. It wasn't careless, it wasn't impulsive, it was simply a normal loss. But something shifts inside you. You feel a tiny sting of irritation. You feel a background pressure that wasn't there before. A voice inside you says, "Not today. I didn't want to start the day like this." Maybe your breathing gets shorter. Maybe your shoulders tighten. Maybe you lean forward as if the chart owes you something. Then your behavior starts shifting. You click faster. You scan more aggressively. You start interpreting noise as signals. One alarm has activated, but you might not notice it yet, or you might notice it but think it's no big deal. The emotional pressure rises a bit more. A hint of insecurity, a whisper of frustration, a subtle desire to get back to equilibrium. And then you see a setup, but you know this setup is mediocre. You know it's not one of your A+ trades. You know it's not aligned with your plan. Yet you feel drawn to it, not because it's good, but because you want relief. This is the emotional alarm. Now both alarms are active. This is the moment, the split-second window, where your trading day is decided. This is the crossroads. Most traders push forward. Most traders ignore the alarms. Most traders try to soothe the discomfort with action. And then the downward spiral begins. But the trader who survives does something rare. The trader who survives does something counterintuitive. The trader who survives does something profoundly difficult. He stops. He pauses. He creates space. He interrupts the emotional cascade before it becomes a flood. Stopping is not weakness. Stopping is strength. Stopping is mastery. Because stopping requires the ability to override emotion with intention. Stopping requires the ability to tolerate tension without reacting. Stopping requires the ability to face yourself honestly. When the alarms activate, you don't negotiate. You don't bargain. You don't look for excuses. You follow the rule. And the rule is stop immediately. The next step is what we call the recovery protocol. But before we dive into it, there is something important to understand. Stopping is not enough. If stopping is the act of hitting the brakes, the recovery protocol is the act of regaining control of the wheel. Stopping without recovering leaves you suspended in discomfort, and unresolved discomfort returns as tilt later in the day. Tilt doesn't disappear just because you stop trading. Tilt dissolves when you regulate your internal state. So what does the recovery protocol look like? It starts with breath. Every emotional state has a corresponding breathing pattern. Shallow breath is the signature of panic. Fast breath is the signature of urgency. Tense breath is the signature of fear. You cannot think clearly when you are breathing like someone under threat. The first step in recovery is to restore your physiology to a state where rational thought is possible. Slow, continuous breathing signals to your nervous system that the threat is over, that you are safe, that you don't need to fight or flee. From breath, we move to space, physical space. You step away from the screen. You disconnect the visual triggers that keep your brain in fight or flight. A tilted trader sitting in front of a chart is like an alcoholic sitting in front of a bottle. The proximity is the problem. Distance is the cure. From space, we move to clarity. Clarity is the return to presence, the return to rationality, the return to balance. And clarity comes when the emotional wave subsides. Only then can you trust your judgment again. But the recovery protocol is not just a technique. It is a ritual that signals to your subconscious that you are in control, that you choose your actions, that you decide your behavior. This is how you build self-trust. Not by winning trades, not by predicting markets, not by being perfect. You build self-trust by proving to yourself that you can stop when you need to stop. Think about that. The strongest trader is not the one who trades flawlessly. The strongest trader is the one who can pause when their entire body is screaming to act. Discipline is not an act of force. Discipline is an act of alignment. Alignment between intention and action, between your rules and your instincts, between your best self and your current self. Tilt destroys alignment. The alarms reveal misalignment. Stopping restores alignment. Recovery reinforces alignment. And alignment is the foundation of consistency. In the final part, we will explore advanced insights that help you predict tilt before it starts, how to use the 2 alarms rule to transform your entire trading psychology, and how to build the internal architecture that protects you from tilt, not just today, but for the rest of your trading life. Tilt isn't something you eliminate once and for all. Tilt is something you learn to dance with, something you learn to recognize, something you learn to interrupt, something you learn to transform. And the 2 alarms rule is not a technique, it is the beginning of mastery. But mastery doesn't end with detection. Mastery begins when detection becomes prediction. When you can sense tilt before it even arrives, when you can feel the shift in yourself before the market triggers it. Because tilt doesn't start with the loss. Tilt starts with what you bring into the day. The loss only activates what was already inside you. So let's go deeper beyond detection, beyond interruption, and into understanding yourself as a trader on the level most traders avoid. Every trader carries emotional baggage onto the chart. Unresolved frustration from previous days, expectations from previous wins, fear built up over weeks of inconsistency, pressure from wanting to prove something, stress from life outside trading, worries that have nothing to do with the chart but everything to do with the inner world. And when you sit down to trade, all of this internal noise creates an emotional baseline. Some days your baseline is calm. Some days your baseline is tense. Some days your baseline is fragile. And on those days, tilt requires almost nothing to ignite. This is why professional traders don't just monitor the market. They monitor themselves. They check their baseline before the day even begins. They ask themselves, am I calm? Am I patient? Am I centered? Am I carrying emotional residue? Am I seeking resolution? Am I trying to make up for something? Am I trading from a place of clarity or a place of need? Need is the root of tilt. Need creates urgency. Need creates desperation. Need creates distortion. Need creates fragility. When you need a trade to work, you are already compromised. When you need a win to restore your confidence is already unstable. When you need to be right, your identity is already entangled with the outcome. Need is the enemy of presence, and presence is the antidote to tilt. This is why the most dangerous tilt is the tilt that begins inside you before the market even opens. But here's the beautiful part. When you understand yourself deeply, when you cultivate awareness, when you create space between stimulus and response, you begin to sense the emotional currents long before they interfere with your decisions. You start to notice the slight impatience in your body, the faint tension in your thoughts, the subtle cravings for action, the quiet urge to get started quickly, the whisper of fear that you try to ignore. You begin to notice the early shifts in your tone of thinking, the background pressure, the hidden frustration, the feeling that something is off even if you can't name it yet. And when you can sense that you don't even need the alarms, you can stabilize yourself before the alarms ever activate. But this level of awareness doesn't arrive on its own. This level of awareness is built through repetition, through practice, through disciplined reflection after every trading day. The trader who avoids reflection repeats the same patterns. The trader who reflects evolves. Your emotions leave fingerprints, your impulses leave clues, your behavior leaves patterns, your losses leave insights, your wins leave distortions. And when you study these fingerprints, you begin to understand yourself on a level that transforms your trading forever. Tilt is never random. Tilt always follows a pattern. Tilt always repeats itself in predictable ways because it is not the market's behavior that causes tilt. It is your own internal structure. So the real work is not to control the market. The real work is to redesign yourself. You don't trade the market. You trade your beliefs. You trade your interpretations. You trade your emotional state. You trade your expectations. You trade your fears. You trade your impulses. You trade your identity. And every time you trade from an unstable identity, you create instability in your results. The two alarms rule is the first layer of protection. But the deeper protection comes from reshaping the internal architecture that makes tilt possible. Let's talk about that. Tilt thrives on identification, the belief that you are your trades, that your value comes from your results, that your worth is tied to your performance, that winning validates you and losing diminishes you. Tilt cannot survive in a mind that separates identity from outcome. When you stop tying your self-worth to individual trades, the market loses its power to destabilize you. When you see losses as feedback rather than personal failures, tilt loses its fuel. When you accept randomness as part of the game, tilt loses its grip. When you embrace uncertainty rather than fight it, tilt loses its influence. And when you build a trading identity based on process, discipline, presence, awareness, and consistent execution, tilt becomes nothing more than a signal to breathe, not a threat to your stability. This is the evolution of a trader. You enter this journey seeking technical skill strategy setups, entries, indicators, timing. But you mature into the realization that this game is not about charts, it is about character, it is about emotional intelligence, it is about psychological resilience, it is about self-awareness, it is about inner peace in the face of uncertainty. The best traders in the world are not the best analysts. They are the best self-managers. They are the best emotional regulators. They are the best at maintaining presence under pressure. Presence is your edge, not prediction, not precision. Presence. Presence is what allows you to see clearly, to act cleanly, to respond consciously, to follow your plan even when your emotions shift. Presence is the ability to remain yourself even when the market tests you. And presence grows from the moment you decide to stop letting tilt define you. Tilt will still appear, but you will meet it differently. You will meet it with awareness. You will meet it with breath. You will meet it with patience. You will meet it with choice. You will recognize the alarms not as warnings of collapse, but as invitations to pause, to reconnect, to regulate, to return to yourself. This is how trading becomes a path of self-mastery instead of a battlefield of emotional chaos. This is how you transform from a trader who reacts into a trader who responds. This is how you evolve from a trader who chases outcomes into a trader who embodies discipline. This is how you shift from fighting the market to aligning with the market by first aligning with yourself. The 2 alarms rule is not the end of tilt. It is the end of tilt controlling you. It is the beginning of you controlling your state, of you controlling your behavior, of you controlling your decisions, of you controlling your destiny as a trader. When tilt activates you, stop. When tilt signals your vulnerability, you pause. When tilt tries to pull you into reaction, you breathe. When tilt threatens your clarity, you reclaim it. And the more you practice this, the more automatic it becomes, the more natural it becomes, the more powerful it becomes, until one day you look back at yourself and realize something profound. You are no longer afraid of tilt. You are no longer destabilized by losses. You are no longer hijacked by emotion. You are no longer controlled by impulse. You have become a trader with presence, a trader with awareness, a trader with discipline, a trader with emotional mastery, a trader who does not fear the storm because he has learned to remain still in the center of it. The market will always test you. Life will always test you. Your emotions will always rise and fall. But your awareness, your discipline, your ability to pause, your ability to listen to the alarms, this is what will save you again and again. Tilt is not your downfall. Tilt is your compass. Tilt is your teacher. Tilt is the mirror that reveals the parts of yourself you have yet to master. And every time the alarms ring and you choose presence over impulse, you become stronger. You become clearer. You become calmer. You become a trader who is no longer at the mercy of psychological weather. You become a trader who can navigate uncertainty with confidence. You become a trader who earns discipline by practicing discipline. You become the version of yourself you always hoped you could be. And it begins with 2 simple alarms that whisper to you when you're slipping. 2 alarms that tell you exactly when to stop, exactly when to breathe, exactly when to step away, exactly when to return to yourself. 2 alarms that can save your day, and over time, your entire trading career. Tilt will always appear. It is part of being human, part of being a trader, part of walking into uncertainty with something at stake. But tilt doesn't define you. How you respond to it does. The 2 alarms rule is the bridge between emotion and discipline, between reaction and presence, between the trader you were and the trader you are becoming. Every time you recognize the alarms and choose to pause, even for a moment, you reclaim control. You protect your clarity. You strengthen your identity. And slowly, consistently, you become a trader who cannot be broken by a single moment of emotional turbulence. If this message resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Mind Over Markets for more deep-grounded insights on trading psychology and inner discipline. Trade well. Trade consciously. And remember, your greatest edge will always be your state of mind.